So we're going to pick up with activity 31B. I was saying that we've divided the power between the federal.
I leave that paper.
Yeah, here it is.
Thanks.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
We're gonna pick up with activity 31B. I was saying that the powers of government are divided between the federal and state governments. The U.S. Constitution assigns some powers to the federal government in 1A, reserves all other powers of government to the state governments, and that's confirmed by the 10th Amendment and stated explicitly in the 10th Amendment. And this is called federalism. Federalism is this division of power between the federal and state governments as established by the U.S. Constitution. And as we're going to see in the remainder of the activity, neither one is under the authority of the other. They're both under the authority of the U.S. Constitution. 31B is known as the Supremacy Clause in Activity 6, and you really have to read this carefully to see what it's saying. We're going to leave the question of treaties outside of our discussion right now, but the Supremacy Clause says that this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. So just notice first it says that this Constitution is the supreme law of the land. That's why I put this up here. And whenever the U.S. Constitution speaks of the United States, it's referring to the federal government. So the next part says that the laws of the federal government, which shall be made in pursuance of the Constitution, are also the supreme law of the land. Now notice this doesn't say that the laws of the federal government shall be the supreme law of the land. It says that the laws of the federal government that are in pursuance of the U.S. Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. So what does that mean? Remember that the word pursuance here means to be following. So whenever the federal government is following the U.S. Constitution, then whatever laws it makes are the supreme law of the land. So what does it take for a federal law to be following the U.S. Constitution? Remember that we've assigned some powers to the federal government in Article 1, Section 8. So for the U.S. government to follow the U.S. Constitution, it can only make laws in the area of Article 1, Section 8 and the 2 or 3 other places where powers are assigned to the federal government in the body of the U.S. Constitution and a couple of places in the amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So what this means in the diagram, if the federal government has only these powers that are in Article 1, Section 8, then anytime the federal government makes a law in this area, whatever it does is supreme. However, outside of that area, beyond this barrier, not only is the federal government not supreme, it has no power whatsoever. So in this area where the state governments have powers reserved to them, they are the ultimate authority, the highest authority for their state. So that's why I say that neither one is under the authority of the other. The federal government is supreme here, the state governments are supreme here. That's what the Supremacy Clause says, and this is confirmed by Hamilton in his explanation in the Federalist Papers of the Supremacy Clause. He says, it will not follow from this doctrine, namely the one stated in Article 6, the Supremacy Clause, that acts of the federal government which are not pursuant to its constitutional powers, but which are invasions of the residuary authorities of the states. Residuary means residue, the leftover powers. Remember, all powers that are not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. Those are the residuary powers. So he describes any law where the federal government goes beyond its limit as determined in Article 1, Section 8, as an invasion of the powers of the states. And he emphasizes these are not the supreme law of the land. These will be acts of usurpation. Usurpation is when a government seizes or someone seizes powers of government that do not rightly belong to that person or to that government. Think back to the Declaration of Independence, where it speaks of the acts of usurpation of the British government, the British Parliament, where they were taking over areas that should have been exercised by the colonial legislatures. So he says these are acts of usurpation and should be treated as such, and acts of usurpation should be treated with defiance and some form of resistance. He says it will not, I presume, have escaped observation that the Constitution, the Supremacy Clause, confines supremacy to laws made pursuant to the Constitution. That is the understanding of all the founders, that Article 1, Section 8 was a limit. There may have been some disagreement about exactly where to draw the line, but there was absolutely no disagreement. I mean, as far as a little bit this way, a little bit that way. There's no disagreement that it was a limit. That was understood. The Necessary and Proper Clause I bring in letter D because also it's subject to some misunderstanding. It's the last of the powers. If you look at Article 1, Section 8, this is the 18th or the last of the powers of Congress in Article 1, Section 8. Notice it does not say the Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. It does. You have to keep on reading. If Congress can make any laws which shall be necessary and proper, then it can do anything just by saying it's necessary and proper. What it goes on to say is the Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. The foregoing powers are the powers listed above this one in Article 1, Section 8. So this is just saying that whatever Congress needs to do to achieve those previous 17 things, it also has power to do. In the 18th power makes that explicitly clear. It's not any kind of elastic clause. I would just encourage you to resist the idea that the founders put any elastic clauses in the U.S. Constitution. You will not find any evidence of that, of which I'm aware, precisely because of their understanding of the Constitution. When you see them speak of constitutions, you'll see images like chains, barriers, bulwarks. These things are not elastic. Chains are not elastic precisely because you want to keep that government in check from harming you. You don't want, if you have a bulldog on a leash, for that leash to be elastic because it'll maul people. The whole point of a leash is to keep that bulldog, not to pick on bulldogs, in safe distance of anybody, and that's what constitutions do. So that's a very modern concept. You see people in the second half of the 20th century or so speak of elastic clauses, but not any of the founders. This is confirmed in Joseph Story, an early Supreme Court justice and commentator on the U.S. Constitution. He just makes it clear that this necessary and proper clause does not enlarge any power granted. It's not a grant of a new power. It just removes uncertainty, as he says, that the means of carrying into execution the granted powers are included in